Does Nvidia really have some type of secret pricing for their GPUs that they give out to third parties? I really had no idea, but recently Linus from, Linus Tech Tips on the Wan Show, they had a discussion where he said that there's something that's a little bit shocking. He didn't exactly name who, but we're going to talk about what it is and what this means for pricing, not only for Nvidia, but for AMD as well, which is pretty shocking and may explain some of the really high MSRP third-party AIB prices that we see. So let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology. Remember to subscribe and smash that like button. We do lots of PC news. For a while, it's been a lot of GPU news, but that's what people want to hear about and want to know when things are going to get better. And unfortunately, with pricing, it seems like things are getting worse and worse. Now, we never really know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, but recently, and I'm going to link it down below, Linus from, Linus Tech Tips on their Wan Show, where they do sort of, almost like a little podcast of what's going on with tech news and things like that. He often will have a lot of insight into the industry since he's been dealing with it, for a very long time. And he mentioned something very interesting and perhaps a bit shocking about possible pricing practices of, a large manufacturer of chips. He didn't specifically say Nvidia or AMD, but we can sort of, infer from the way that he was talking about Nvidia that it most likely is, going to be them. Now, here is why this is important. When you go and you buy your GPU, most of the time it's going to be a third-party AIB. We've covered Founders Edition or reference GPUs here before, AMD and Nvidia. Nvidia will have their Founders Edition, which they produce themselves. They've designed their own actually excellent cooler, and then AMD has their own reference GPUs, which I've always actually really liked the design of these sort of GPUs that are made from the manufacturer. They certainly look really clean, and it's usually what they show you in the marketing material. So often it comes out looking very official, but anyway, most of the time, you're going to end up being able to buy a third-party AIB GPU. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean, for example, on the Nvidia side, you may get EVGA, MSI, Asus, and generally they're going to have much higher pricing than you'll see from the Founders Edition from Nvidia. So case in point, the Nvidia Founder Edition RTX 3000 GPUs, let's take the 3080 for example. Upon release, it was $699 MSRP, and if you go to a third-party GPU, even back then, I think technically they're supposed to have at least one stripped-down model from an AIB partner that should also be sort of the base MSRP. Something from EVGA would be like their most basic GPU, but for the most part, for like 99% of the third-party GPUs, they're going to be more expensive. This is even before we take into account everything that happened with the inflated pricing. So even at release, if the Founders Edition is $699 from Nvidia, and they want to maintain that MSRP, because after all, that's what looks good in press and all of the media outlets, and a lot of times these early reviews, people still look back, even now when they're buying a GPU, but even back then, you'll find an Asus Strix for, well over that amount. Usually without inflated pricing, it used to be maybe $100 to $200 more for the same 3080, but being from a third-party AIB, EVGA, MSI, they'll have models anywhere from $799 to even nearing $900. Now, this was before all of these pricing increases. Now we can see that these third-party AIB prices are considerably higher. For example, most 3080s have breached the $1,000 mark easily. We're not even talking about your friendly neighborhood scalper here. We're talking about simply the price of the GPU as sort of the third-party AIB partner, says it's the MSRP. So if you look at that, now look at the original Nvidia MSRP for the RTX 3000. Believe it or not, that has not changed at all. Neither has the AMD. Now, we know this because recently Best Buy had a pretty, decent size drop, and most of the GPUs, not all, but most of them were Founders Edition. And guess what? They were being sold at last year's MSRP. If you walked in a few weeks ago to Best Buy, you would get a 3080 for $699. Therefore, Nvidia's pricing has been unaffected by any type of GPU shortage, any type of, tariffs, anything else. That price has stayed the same regardless of what has happened. You may be saying, Wow, that's actually excellent news. Nvidia is such a, fantastic company. They haven't raised the prices at all. But this is where it gets interesting and where what Linus said in that video, once again, I'm going to link it down below so you get sort of the full context. He talked about a lot of other things, the full context of what I'm talking about. And this also can apply, of course, directly to AMD. Just using Nvidia here because he used it in the video more as an example. He basically said how the third-party AIB GPU partners are generally a lot more dependent and tied more strongly to Nvidia versus AMD, simply because Nvidia just sells a lot more GPUs. They just have a tremendous amount more volume, a lot more market share. So that's why he mentioned them, but this can be true as well for AMD. Like I said, he just allegedly said it. He didn't say, exactly who it was. I think he just wanted to, pretty much stay a little bit neutral while giving us that information. So we see the real world effects. If you try to buy a 3080 third-party AIB card, like an Asus, whatever it is, EVGA, they're going to be a lot more than the $699 price. And the companies have explained this to us as, through all the manufacturing issues, there are tariffs, there's a million reasons, high demand from both gamers and crypto miners. Certainly a lot of reasons why this has held to be true. Now, and then you look at the original Nvidia MSRP, which, as is proved by the Best Buy drop, people are still getting those GPUs at MSRP. As rare as it may be, and you have to stand in line, it's still happening. Officially, they have not changed that MSRP. So in Linus's video, basically, this is what he says. He says that while it's true that Nvidia has maintained the same price and the AIBs have been more, behind the scenes, I guess when Nvidia, remember, they have to sell the GPU from, Samsung, from wherever they get, they have to kind of sell that package over to the AIBs. So during that process, they themselves, allegedly, as Linus says, have increased that price. Nvidia or AMD, he didn't make it clear, just so I say it again. So Nvidia has raised the price of that, let's call it the base GPU that they send out to a third-party AIB, who then will put on their own coolers and do whatever modifications that they need to do to the PCB. Generally, this is what has sort of warranted them having a bigger premium. They're going to have a nicer flasher cooler and things like that. The only problem has been in the past, people have been accepting of those price premiums on third-party cards because they're getting a much better cooler. They're getting something different. The big issue here now is that these prices have been jacked up a considerable more amount than normal. For example, $699 to $1,000 or $1,100 for the MSRP of a 3080. That's a huge margin, and no cooler really justifies that. That's why people are a little bit upset. But anyway, that's what Linus basically said, that at the Nvidia side of things, they're passing on that, that cost to the third-party AIBs. So why is that important? A lot of the times, people will actually blame some of the third-party AIBs outright that they're being greedy, this and that. And while it may be true, and optically, this is great marketing for Nvidia because, all of the other companies are going to get the brunt of the complaints from the consumer, which is actually very important because that's going to be the general, the mind share, much like Intel and AMD. You remember that battle and what effect it had on the actual companies, where AMD was able to sort of steal away the mind share and the enthusiasm for PC building from Intel. So Nvidia is very aware of that, and they want to keep that from happening. So while as people are blaming, Asus and MSI for jacking up prices, nobody's really even going to think about Nvidia because, to think that, all right, that PCB or that base GPU that gets sent out, if that's the thing that's going up in price, nobody's really ever going to know because, after all, Nvidia is still selling their GPU at MSRP, even now at $699. As benevolent as that may seem, that for them to sell it at that price, perhaps for them it's worth more to have the good marketing of having that GPU be MSRP, so at least it shows that they're the good guy in this situation, rather than if they jack the prices, because even though they're not releasing a huge amount of GPUs at these drops, don't get me wrong, the Founders Edition, you're going to find a lot less than the other GPUs, so if they're not making as much money or even losing a little bit, who knows what's going on these GPUs, for them, probably the positive marketing, message that gets out there of MSRP GPUs, or at least it being neutral, is probably worth its weight in gold. Imagine if they were doing these drops themselves and their prices were considerably higher. Even though not many people will get these GPUs, many people will hear about these drops either through social media like this on YouTube, or they're going to read all of the tech news websites. As soon as these drops happen at Best Buy, they really go off. So if people see that the MSRP is really high, you can bet that's going to be a primary complaint, and it's just going to bring bad press to Nvidia. So while people will pay a lot more than $699 for the 3080, as is evident by the third-party AIBs as well as the scalper market, Nvidia keeps it artificially low, and we really don't know what's going on behind the scenes until Linus obviously pointed out that this could be a possibility, or very likely, allegedly, that Nvidia is just pricing their stuff higher and passing it on to the AIB partners. Now, is there anything wrong with that picture technically? I mean, it's a business, so if they're selling more, they have to pass their costs on or raise it anyway if people are going to buy it. I guess the issue here is the whole optics of the situation. While doing this without mentioning anything, like we've never heard from Nvidia saying that their costs are going up because of this or because of that. Generally, it's been the third-party AIBs with the responsibility of passing that information on. Like, for example, at the beginning of the year, when we first found out that the tariffs were going to, negatively affect GPU prices. Actually, we heard it from ASUS first. So, I mean, that makes sense. That's the company that's going to be most directly affected by it. So even though it is an Nvidia product going in an ASUS product in their coolers, I guess they kind of passed the baton on to the third-party AIBs. In a way, I guess most of the general population going to have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. But, due to what Linus said, this is definitely something that kind of occurs there. And then really the only complaint here is that we as the consumer, really have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, and people will continue to view Nvidia in a neutral way if they don't see their own MSRP going up, while directing all of the complaints towards the AIB partners. At least for now, it probably won't matter for the companies what people think of it, because they're selling in such massive volumes that they really will tend not to really care. But remember, this boom likely won't last forever. There were always dips and things that changes, and then you can bet that a lot of people will remember sort of the companies that were more consumer friendly, the companies that, took better care of their customers. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, still means prices are just way too high, and we're definitely still worried for the future of, PC gaming and GPUs in general. All right, guys, so I hope you liked the video. Let me know what you think down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.